Welcome to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Jenn Hanson-dePaula. Jenn, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
I know we are going to have such a good time, and I would love for you to start with, how did you get into helping authors?
Ooh, it was a fun, happy accident, actually. I I got started in the music industry. I was right when I graduated college, I accepted a job at a record label in Nashville, Tennessee, and I worked there. I worked for two different labels for over the span of 5 years. And then this was really when there was a big change, social media was coming into play. And in the music industry, we went through that crazy digital change of, going from CDs to digital music and all that stuff. And the world was really changing. And living in Nashville, I had so many friends that were independent musicians that I knew, okay, there is no way they could ever afford to pay for a publicist or get help with marketing. And so I started the first phase of my company for musicians, and really seeing how social media, that was in 2005, social media was really starting to come on the scene. And as a publicist, there were, people from the label saying, oh, we need to incorporate this into, using it in a way, it just kind of looking at it as, free advertising. And I kind of looked, I was like, it's so much more than this. And so I started seeing how we could, coming from the traditional side of doing marketing, you had to go through the editor of a major publication, or through a producer, or, all these different things. There were all these gatekeepers. And I was like, wow, this is amazing how we can get directly to fans. And so as we started kind of working that into the overall plan, I had friends that were authors that were coming to me. And I have always been an avid reader. I love books. And it was always a dream to work somehow with authors. And so when these friends started coming saying, is there a way you could show me how to do this for books? And I took a beat and I was like, heck yeah, I can, and so it's just kind of, we kind of worked through it together. And as I worked more and more with authors, I realized how, musicians kind of know that they need to go and perform, or they create this album and they have to go out and perform. And granted, it might not, some of them are introverts, but it's just kind of okay, they have to do this. But with our sweet authors, many of them just want to stay in their closet and just type. And they just want to, just write. And they don't want to go out and do all the things that they have to do to get their book out, especially in today's world. And so as I was working more and more with authors, I realized I didn't want to split my attention between, musicians and authors. I really wanted to focus on specifically working with authors, writers, no matter what genre they wrote. And so it was really kind of several different paths to get here, but I'm so thankful for all of those paths, because I feel like it gave me a unique experience and a unique perspective in order to best serve authors in a way that is relevant to today.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I really love the fact that you make the correlation that you're right. A musician, they record an album, but the tour that happens is in support of that album.
Yes.
And yes, they make sales at the event, but really it's going back to the royalties and the sales from the albums and so forth. So
yes,
I was just thinking about this the other day when a band that I really like dropped a new album. And I was like, interesting. And I started thinking about all the logistics that went into it. And you mention it now. So
yes,
that's awesome.
Yeah. Well, and it's also interesting because because for years I thought, okay, there's very little difference, because when I worked at the label, we would have several projects where it would connect with a book project. Andy Griffith, for example, I did his Christmas album, which was crazy. And he also had a companion book that went with it. And so like working with that publisher was the first time that I kind of had a glimpse into the publishing world. And that was years and years ago. And like, even just seeing how bands work and just seeing how they, you know, like the majority of their sales didn't come from CDs. It came from the merch, like the stickers, the, you know, all these other things, the buttons. And so it's like thinking, okay, how can, you know, like authors, you know, like, yes, there are books, but are there other things that they can also monetize with it? And so it's just kind of like trying to think outside of the box. And that's the kind of thing that I love to do.
Oh, I love that. That's a really great point because, you know, in one way you can look at that and say, okay, if you're a nonfiction writer, do you have a complimentary course that you could teach, a workshop you could teach, you could create keynotes off of that. If you're a fiction writer, you could still talk about like you could do a keynote or a course about how you went about writing for the genre, like you're teaching about that piece or showing the insights to that. So I could just see those, never mind the whole idea of, you know, t-shirts or something at an event, you know, from that standpoint.
Exactly. And, you know, like for nonfiction, sometimes the book is an ancillary product. Like it's something that really just and I get so frustrated. Like I'm seeing a lot of marketing people talk about how you can make millions of dollars selling a $10 ebook. I'm like, that is so insanely misleading because yes, that $10 ebook might be a part of many, many, many other, you know, like you said, courses or, you know, products or other services. And so when some people see, and I think that that's something too, where I want to be very honest and open with authors because there are so many misleading and it's too good to be true remedies that are being thrown out there that I think are doing so much more damage, not only to these authors and their careers, but also to people who might not know, like that might be brand new to this whole process and who might come into it under the guise of very misleading information. And my heart breaks for people who've fallen victim to that. But I do think that, you know, we can do so much better with educating authors with this is, you know, like, this is the better option for you, or, you know, like giving solid advice and trustworthy advice that can empower them to make the best decisions.
Absolutely. And when I think about a book, I think of it as part of an ecosystem. Like it's a part of your business. When you first wrote that book, you might not have decided to take on the hat or recognize that the hat of business owner was going to be a part of the hats. And at that point you're wearing creative hat or writer hat, but you ultimately, once you hit publish and you're bringing in some kind of money, you are in a business. And even if you want your business to be, I am an author and I'm doing rapid launches, or I am focused on writing and focused on books, you're still running a business and thinking about all of those parts. So I really like what you were talking about, that there's so much information to try to figure out. And for one, you want to be clear about what business model you want to have, but also there's a difference. And I know we were chatting a little bit about this before we hit record, between marketing and sales. And that can be it can be scary in some ways because, you know, both of them might feel really uncomfortable for somebody. But on top of it, they've also been, you know, lumped together before and not recognized as, they're more like cousins, not necessarily twins per se.
Exactly. And I think so have you ever seen the show Schitt's Creek? Have you the show? Okay, you've seen it or you've heard of it. So there's this episode, even if you aren't familiar with it, where Moira, the mother, and David, the son, are in the kitchen cooking. And Moira, the mother, is reading the recipe, says, next step is to fold in the cheese. And David looks at her and he's stirring. He's like, what does fold in the cheese mean? And she says, you fold it in. And he was like, yeah, I hear that, but what does it mean? She's like, I can't tell you everything. And she was like, well, can you tell me this one thing? She's like, you just folded it. And she just kept using the same, folded in all the same time. And I feel like, and when I watched that, because my brain is constantly on marketing, I thought this is the perfect representation of what, when publishers and other marketers say to authors, market your book. And authors go, okay, but what does that mean? And it's like, well, you market it. Well, what does that mean? Well, you put it out there and you market it. And we don't say what it is. What is marketing? And so they go into this thinking that it's this one thing, that it's this big, scary thing that where you're having to sell your book and to do all of these different things. But in reality, marketing is completely separate from sales. And marketing is all about connection. It's all about relationships, and it's all about making people aware that you and your book actually exist. And it's also not about, I always tell my clients, if you're trying to market your book to everyone, you're going to market it to no one. And that many times when I tell authors that, you see kind of this veil of, oh, thank God, cause it's like, it's just kind of, it's so intimidating to think, okay, I have to talk to 10,000 people, but it's like, no, if you focus on just like your ideal reader, what is this group of people that you want to connect with, that you think is going to respond to your books? Those are the people that you talk to. And so when you focus just on connection and building relationships, when it comes time to actually sell your book, it's going to be so much easier because you already have your people's attention. And it's a lot easier to sell to people when they're already paying attention. It's harder to convince people, like when they don't even know who you are. So when you do marketing, it's just like making connections with people that you want to connect with. It's making new friends. It's making these connections with people who love what you're putting out. You're not trying to sell. If you write romance, you're not trying to sell to someone who reads horror or, true crime or anything like that. No, they're not going to be interested. But if you're talking to other people who love romance, they're going to love to talk about that kind of thing. So it's really differentiating what those two tasks are, because they are very, very different. And when you do the marketing well, when you kind of like ease into it and you really focus on that, the sales part becomes so much easier and less intimidating.
The way I'm processing marketing in this way, it's how I think of it in the context of being of service. It's how can I, show up, add value, and just enjoy being in that space. And because you're doing that, it's not that you're not saying, oh, I have these books or what have you. It's a matter of saying, oh, I want to build this relationship. And oh, by the way, there's a book here. Oh, by the way, this is what's happening. Like, for instance, when I would do, and when I do actually book signings, and it's centric around my picture books, my Einstein and Moo books, I have a picture of the two of them on adoption day, when they were 3.5 months old. And I put one, it's Einstein and Moo. So there's books on Einstein, books on Moo. Well, book one of the series for Einstein is beside his picture. The first book for Mushu in the series is by her picture. So I've told you a lot just by the table. And it's so cool because when people come up, the first thing they're like, oh my gosh, are those your kitties? Yes. And I'm like, do you have animals? Tell me about your animals. I'm talking with them about what I love, which is I love hearing about animals. I love talking about my kitties. I love hearing about other people's animals, because there's that camaraderie and connection. And oh, by the way, there's the books. And if it resonates with you, great. If not, that's okay. I had a great conversation getting to know someone else who appreciates animals.
Well, and you have made an impression with them as well. Even though another thing I always tell authors is that even though you're ready to sell, it doesn't always mean readers are ready to buy.
Yes.
And that is not a bad thing, because in marketing, it's important to remember that, especially if people are just meeting you for the first time, it takes on average 7 to 8 impressions in order for them to actually take action. And so like, if you're on social media, that's why showing up and like even just reiterating your same message over and over again is so important. You don't need to come up with 1,000,001 topics to talk about, on social media. It's like coming up with the same 3 or 4 and just, cycling through them. But because you have made such an impression, when someone is ready to buy a book, like that relates to you, they'll think, oh, Jenn has that amazing book. That's right. And then they will purchase. And so when you make that impression, I think it's genuine, it's authentic, and people don't feel pressured to buy.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody likes to feel marketed to, like in that sense, like they don't want to be pressured into something. And so I think when people just come right out and say, buy my book, and that's the only thing that they say, it's a big turnoff. So it's like, how can you communicate in an effective way with your readers is so important.
You mentioned something about the message and saying it 3 or 4, like not 3 or 4 times, but having 3 or 4 messages and recycling them so many times. Would you help an author get a little comfortable with feeling repetitive and recognizing that it's actually okay? Because yes, there might be a sense of relief of I only need 3 or 4, and then it's a sense of, oh my gosh, am I gonna repel people because I'm saying the same thing over and over again?
Yes. Okay. So this is my favorite thing to talk about. It's something that I love to do, because when I talk to authors, specifically, let's say about social media, we think, what am I going to talk about? What is it? And they really struggle with it. They think, okay, I'll talk about my book, but it's like, okay, you only get, like so many things that you can do, to talk about your book. So the thing that I encourage authors to do, it's called content buckets. And content buckets are 3 to 5 topics. I think the sweet spot, honestly, is like 2 or 3 topics that you can cycle through. But what you do is you come up with 3 topics that you can talk about and cycle through week after week. So let's say you're doing 3 posts a week and 3 posts on social media a week. Mondays could be about your book. Wednesdays could be about books that you're reading. That could be another one. And then the third could be some tips on, like writing or within the industry that you're serving in. And when you look at like the month of July, you'll see, okay, there are 4, like, I don't know how many Mondays they are, but like, okay, there are 4 Mondays in the month. So I only have to come up with 4 topics I need to talk about on my book for this month, and only 4 and 4. So like when you break it down, you think, okay, I only have to talk about 4 topics or 4 things about my book. Then I can do that. That's pretty easy. And you can think about, okay, this is the character that I'm writing about. This is these are some of the characteristics. You can introduce them to some really great pull quotes from your book. You can share a review. You can share, like there are things that you can do that just center around your book. And then the same for the books that you're reading, and then the same for the tips. And the thing that this does is when you can cycle through these 3 things week after week, first of all, you're going to see what readers respond to and what your audience responds to. But most importantly, it makes you known for something. It makes you known for what kinds of books you write, what kind of books that you love. And if you've ever seen someone, like if you've ever walked into a coffee shop and you see someone reading a book that you absolutely love, you immediately want to run up to them and go, oh, it gets so good. Just wait till you get to this part. Or, I learned so much from this. You almost fall in love with them, because it's like, oh, they like the same things that I do. And the same thing goes on, like on social media, they fall in love with you. It's like, oh, they love the same things that I love. And if they love that book, I can't imagine what their book is going to be like, and so it creates this lovely mixture of things that you can really connect with your readers on. But when we talk about anything and everything, it kind of makes everything really loosey-goosey, and it doesn't give your reader something to hook onto, because they don't really, it's all, like, it's kind of looking at Netflix and becoming too overwhelmed with like everything that you have to choose from. And then you just end up turning it off, or watching the same show over and over again. And so like when you go through the content buckets, you can really, it not only makes it easier for you to consistently create content, but it also helps your readers know exactly what it is that you are all about and what they are going to gain from you.
And what I hear you inferring is, with the content buckets, if you feel like you're a private person, or you are not as comfortable yet talking about yourself in some way, or things about you in some way, when you recognize, I have this one content bucket and all I need are 4 things to come up with, I can come up with 4 things that are related to this, that I don't mind people knowing, for instance, or I can talk about repeatedly, for instance. And that might help to minimize that feeling of, especially if you're writing memoir, oh my goodness, how do I talk about this? And where I've already written about quite a bit in my book, I don't want to feel even more exposed. How do I talk about this? So to your point, those contents really help you to also create, I would liken them to a little bit of a guardrail of saying, this is what I'm okay with. These are the containers I'm okay with. And these are fine for me. And when I'm ready to expand into a new container or swap that still amplifies my message, that's okay. But this is where I can start.
Exactly. And that is something where every author has a line in the sand that they need to draw. So for example, I don't share pictures of my son, for example, in my feed on Instagram. I'll share pictures of him in my stories because they go away in, like 24 hours. But that is just something that I decided, okay, I'm not comfortable with that. And especially as my audience grew, I mean, I have 25,000 people following, and I'm like, that's something that I don't want that, everyone to have his face, all over the place. And so it's something, but there are some authors where they're like, my kids are a part of my books and they're actively involved with it. And that's awesome. And it's, again, what do you feel comfortable with? And I always tell authors, start simple and get fancy later. So if that is something where I don't know exactly how much I personally want to share about my life, that's fine. Stick with your book, maybe share some books that you're reading, and maybe share, like you can share some tips that you've learned along the way or something. You don't need to show your face right away. It's something where you can, like I created a bunch of Reels templates for authors so that they don't have to show their face. So it's something where it's like, I know that this is a struggle for authors. So like, again, just kind of recite in your head, I can start simple and I can always get fancy later. They have a long career ahead of them and their book is going to last a long time. So you don't have to do it all at once.
That is a big thing that I talk about on the show, but with clients as well, is that, once you hit publish, it's a whole new level that you're embarking upon. And it's really, writing that book was an undertaking. Don't get me wrong. I know, and I get it. And it also is a part of a longer journey. It's like a marathon, and it in of itself felt like that. But when you look at your book is out there 2 years, 3 years, 5 years later, you can still talk about it. You can still find ways to talk about it or tie it back into something else that you released a new one, but how does it differ or relate to a previous book? Or where did some inspiration come from, or what have you? You've got a lot of opportunity to talk about it.
Yeah.
Something you mentioned that I really think is important for people to hear is, when they don't have the book published yet, maybe they're in the process of writing, maybe they are in the editing, haven't really gotten it out yet. And there's the apprehension of, well, what if my date moves? Or what if I don't have all the parts yet? Or, when is it okay to really start talking about my book, what would you say to them?
Well, this is really a newer mentality because like if we were even talking, 10, 15 years ago, you would only have about 3 months in order for like if you were traditionally publishing where you would have the time, like the publisher's attention to market your book. And now we are in, some people might see it as a hindrance. I look at it as a big positive because you are able to talk about it so much sooner and so much longer, like after the release date. And so when we talk about, like really the talking about your book before the release date, it's really important to understand the 3 phases of book marketing. So the first phase is called the attraction phase. And that happens really the minute you start writing up until about 3 months, depending on the marketing, like the promotions that you might have, but usually about 3 months before the release date. And what the attraction phase is that's where you are really, you can mention that you're writing a book. You can share, like your writing journey and kind of introduce them. Like if you write fiction, you can start introducing them to some characters. If you write nonfiction, you can share some tips or some how-tos that pertain to the book. And you can also share about, like maybe the books that you're reading or some hobbies that you have. It's really about connecting with people as a human being. You're not coming at this like an author trying to sell a book right now. You're trying to connect with fellow people. Again, it's connecting with the people that you want to connect with. So that's the attraction phase. And then once you get into the promotional phase, that's about 3 months before the book releases until about 2 weeks after the release date. And this is really when you have a better idea as to, okay, these are the promotions that I'm going to be doing. This is my actual release date. This is, like when I know it is going to show up in Amazon.
Mhm.
You have so many different things, being able to be more solid within your marketing. And so this is like where you have the time to promote and where you are really starting to begin to ask them to pre-order your book, beginning to ask them to purchase. And so this is the promotional phase. And then we get into the follow-up phase. And this to me is one of the most overlooked sections of the whole marketing process, because many authors think, okay, once the book is out, then I'm on to the next book or, like whatever I want to do next. And the follow-up phase is about 2 weeks after the book releases into infinity. It's really where it kind of blends back into the attraction phase, because if you're working on another book, they just kind of all start to melt together. But with the follow-up phase, this is where you kind of mix both the promotional and the attraction phase, where you can continue to talk about the book and, move on. So when we were talking about, like, how do I talk about my book before I have many details of my release, it's really about sharing, I call it the essence of your book. You don't need to give everything away in order to start talking about it. Start talking about introducing them to some characters or introducing them to some concepts that you want to write. If you write memoirs, what were some of those struggles that that you talk about in the book that, can really connect with people or that people can identify with? And there are so many ways that you can talk about the book without giving it away, but you're still drawing them in. So it's really important to start that attraction phase as soon as possible. But if you find yourself, if your book is about ready to release and you're saying, oh, shoot, I haven't had an attraction phase, you haven't lost, there's nothing, like you can still always start to talk about it. That's the beauty of books. They are going to be around for a very, very long time. So you haven't missed out on anything.
I love that you said that, because there could be that fear of, I didn't know what I didn't know, or what
Yeah.
have you. And it's like, but when you are excited about what you created, when you are really proud of the fact that you did this, and it's a sense of like, wow, I can't wait to share this, you want to talk about it. So it's
Oh,
okay to
yeah.
keep talking about it. I mean, why not? Because goodness gracious, you never know where that next opportunity will come, simply because you made a connection and you showed that your book showed up at the right time for that person.
Exactly. Exactly. And I've heard so many authors say that, oh, I'm afraid of screwing up my marketing, or I'm afraid of talking about something too soon or talking about something too late. And honestly, like I never look at any, unless you like did something horrible to someone, that's, like that's a mistake. That's awful. But if you feel like, oh, I showed the cover of my book too early, that's not going to deter people. Like, and it's kind of, they overthink everything and they become paralyzed by this fear of not doing everything perfectly right off the bat. And I say this with all the love and compassion in my heart. You're going to screw up. You are. Everyone
Yes.
does. But you learn from that. And you can go, okay, I might have showed my cover a little too early. That's fine. So now I can just, keep showing it and, like kind of pepper that in through my social media posts. Or, like if my release date changes, hey, guess what? Like it's changed. No control here, like we just kind of deal with it. And so there really isn't, you can't screw it up because there's something that can always be done. And I'm a big believer in things happen for a reason. And it's like, okay, let's see, instead of looking at the negative, let's see how we can work with it.
I'm so with you. And Jenn, this has been awesome. Where can people connect with you? Where can they be a part of your world?
Well, if they want to come on over to mixtusmedia.com, MIXTUS media.com. We have a podcast, we have blogs, we have free information. I have a free book marketing blueprint that people can download, and you can just find everything there. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok under mixtusmedia.com, or it's just under, I'm sorry, Mixtus Media, at Mixtus Media.
Jenn, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been so much fun with you.
It has been. Thank you so much for having me.